Okay, we are ready. Our distinguished lecturer has arrived. He's in the house. Yay, Brian! I asked Diane, have we ever had a no-show with a speaker? She says, no. I said, so we don't have a plan B? No. I hope we don't need a plan B anytime. Anyway, Brian's going to talk to us about one of our local mining movers and shakers, John Daly. And as you know, quite a few historic mines in the area are named after him, so he's a pretty notable gentleman. Just a little background on Brian. He has a degree in geology and a master's in geological engineering that he earned from University of Utah. Woo! Back when our country turned 200 years old. I'll let you do the math. He has been involved in the mining industry for about 5 decades. He's also an avid mining historian. And we are fortunate with the Friends Group that he is our project manager and all the work that's we've been doing with the stabilization, vitalization of our mining structures. So, and now strap in and let's learn about John Daly.
Thank you all. So glad you're here. This lecture was first presented on the evening of January 6, 2021. Do you remember that day? And we did it via Zoom because the pandemic, and it was heavily attended. People are really interested in the topic, and I'm glad to see that continues. So thank you for being here. So the story of John Daly and the Daly West Mine is also the story of the mining industry around early Park City. And together tonight, we will touch on Park City mining history from the 1860s to 2022. So hang on. Save your questions, please, during the presentation, and we'll get to all of them at the end. To get us oriented about the mines that we'll be discussing here, here's an aerial photo taken before the ski runs were built in the 1960s, looking southwest over town. Park City is in the bottom of the valley here, and Ontario Canyon is marked with Ontario Mill and the Ontario Mine further up the canyon, and that is the location going up that canyon of Marsac Avenue now. The Marsac Mill is here in town, where the transit center is currently located. And then if you go up Main Street to Daly Avenue, that then goes all the way into Empire Canyon. And so we'll be talking about this whole area of Empire Canyon. And some of the major mines there are the American Flag, the Daly Judge Tunnel, the Daly No. 2 Shaft, the Daly No. 1, the Daly West, Quincy, Little Bell, and Anchor Mine. So we'll touch on all of those. And pay attention, there'll be a test at the end. Prospectors were exploring the Park City area as far back as the late 1860s. The geology of the area includes veins and bedded deposits of minerals containing silver, lead, copper, and other metals. And these deposits exist deep underground, but they also may outcrop on the surface. And these outcrops are what the prospectors sought. In 1868, prospectors discovered lead-silver ore on what we now call Flagstaff Mountain. And so by 1871, the first shipments of ore from the Flagstaff mine were carried by wagon to the recently completed Transcontinental Railroad in Echo, Utah. Some of that ore was rich enough to be shipped directly to smelters. Some of it was actually shipped to Britain. Most of it went to smelters in the Salt Lake Valley to extract the pure metal from the minerals in the ore. But shipping was too expensive for the lower grade ore. So the Marsac Mill was built in 1874 in Park City to extract silver bullion from the Flagstaff ore. And this mill was located where the Old Town Transit Center is now. You can just see the size of that mill. Another outcropping of very high-grade lead-silver ore was discovered in Ontario Canyon. The original claim holders sold their claims to George Hurst in 1872, who hired Robert Craig Chambers as the mine general manager. And under R.C. Chambers, the mine rapidly grew into the largest silver producer in Utah. The mine was worked through 3 vertical shafts and the mile-long Ontario No. 1 drain tunnel, located in Lower Ontario Canyon along what we now call Marsac Avenue. Another deeper drainage tunnel, the Ontario No. 2, was completed later and was driven from the Ontario mine workings eastward underground for 3 miles to Keatley, near the current Jordanelle Reservoir. The Ontario Silver Mining Company built its own mill in 1877 in Lower Ontario Canyon, and that's what we see in this photograph. It was located where the runaway truck ramp is located now in Lower Ontario Canyon along Marsac Avenue. Although the Ontario mine was the largest and richest silver mine in the entire state, in 1876 there were many other local prospects and mine developments, and men interested in working at the mines in Utah rushed into the area. And this is all because the mines paid $3 to $4 per day for a miner in the 1870s, when the average U.S. wage for laborers was $1.50 per day. Park City grew from a few tents, dugouts, and cabins to a flourishing small city by the 1880s, with a railroad connection, running water, electric power, and yes, even telephones. It had a second direct rail connection to Salt Lake City in 1890, when it had a population of almost 3,000. So a visitor entering the early Park City from the north in the 1890s would be able to see the 2 railroad tracks coming into town. The multiple smokestacks of the Ontario mill would be evident in the center background above town. And that's back here with the smoke coming out. And here you see the 2 railroad tracks. The Marsac mill, with its 1 tall stack, would be a dominant feature on the east side of town, and that's this stack over here. Although the mines would not be apparent, because they were located in the mountains and canyons around town, there would be no doubt for a visitor that the reason for Park City was mining. The 3 Ontario mine shafts were located up Ontario Canyon, south of town, with the No. 1 shaft located furthest up the canyon. And this old photograph shows the No. 1 shaft right here. The No. 2 shaft was a little way to the north and to the east of the No. 1 shaft. And the No. 3 shaft, was on the west side of the canyon. All of the buildings in this photo are gone now, with the single exception of that No. 3 shaft and the headframe, which was completely reconstructed in the 1970s and still stands today above Marsac Avenue as you drive up. The early development of the Ontario Silver Mine was under the direction of R.C. Chambers, general manager. Here he leans on loaded mine cars, waiting to be lifted to the surface in the 2-compartment shaft in the distance. He controlled all aspects of the mining operation and also had considerable influence on the development of Park City until he passed away in 1901. And this well-dressed gent underground is R.C. Chambers. One of the employees in that early Ontario mine was a young man named John Joseph Daly. Born in Morris, Illinois in 1853, he lost his immigrant parents by the time he was just 10 years old. After only 2 years of formal schooling, he took a job as a cabin boy on a Missouri River steamboat. He left the boat in Montana when he was 14. and found work at different trading posts. By listening to the traders and prospectors, he learned about prospecting in Montana when he was just a boy. Rich silver ore was discovered in the White Pine Mining District in eastern Nevada, and so he moved there in 1869. He was just 16 at the time. But he apparently was a fast learner in the mining business, and it is reported that by 1876, when he was 23 years old, he had already acquired a comfortable sum of money. He and some partners invested in the Jones Bonanza mine property in Bonanza Flat, south of the Ontario mine, and he relocated to Utah. They were seeking silver lodes like those being mined in the Flagstaff and Ontario mines, but they were not successful. So John Daly went to work at the Ontario mine. But John never lost his dream that the ore found in the Ontario mine extended west and south of the Ontario into Empire Canyon. And he spent his spare time prospecting in that area. He married Eliza Margaret Benson from Liverpool, England in 1881. And thereafter, they raised a family of 7 kids. They lived in Salt Lake City and built a large mansion on Brigham Street, we now call South Temple. This neighborhood was famous for the number of elegant homes built by the wealthiest residents of Utah at the time, most of them mine managers. Sorry about the poor photo, but it's the only one I could find of Eliza. So Daly acquired mining claims just over the ridge to the west of the Ontario mine, again in Empire Canyon. He founded the Daly Mining Company in 1885 with controlling interest by R.C. Chambers and others from the Ontario Silver Mining Company. The Daly Shaft number 1 was developed on the east slope of Empire Canyon, with the Daly Shaft number 2 located further north and higher on the slope. And here we see the Daly number 1, and this is Empire Canyon. And so we're on the east slope of Empire Canyon, on the divide between Empire Canyon and Ontario. And then further to the north, you can just make out on the horizon here the location of the number 2 shaft. Daly's mine hit the same lode as the Ontario, and it used the Marsac mill to process the ore. By 1886, the Daly mine had produced over $1.1 million in total revenue, and so it started paying dividends in 1887. Between 1887 and 1896, the Daly mine paid almost $3 million in dividends, worth over $111 million in today's dollars, making John Daly very wealthy by the time he was 40 years old. The Daly mine was known for being well equipped with excellent facilities such as those seen at the Daly Shaft number 2 in the photograph. Note the fully enclosed headframe. This tall building here covers the headframe and the shops adjacent to it, and a modern, for the time, boarding house and offices next door. The Daly mine closely coordinated its operations with the Ontario. They were connected underground to allow water and ore from the Daly mine to be moved through the Ontario mine and out the Ontario number 1 tunnel in Lower Ontario Canyon. In 1888, Daly resigned as superintendent of the Daly mine, and after that, all operations were managed by Ontario Silver Mine management personnel. While he was developing that mine, in 1887, John Daly began, as a contractor, to drive a drainage tunnel for the Anchor Mining Company in Empire Canyon. This tunnel was successful in draining groundwater from the Anchor mine, but it also had the benefit of draining groundwater from all the surrounding terrain in Empire Canyon, which was of interest to John Daly, as we will see. That tunnel is now called the Daly Judge Tunnel and still drains water that is used by Park City Municipal. Daly continued to believe in the mineral potential of the ground further south and west of the Daly mine, further up in Empire Canyon. He acquired other mining claims southwest of the Daly property and started the Daly West Mining Company, again with half ownership by R.C. Chambers and other owners of the Ontario mine. They sank a shaft to over 1,200 feet and found good lead-silver ore bodies, so they built a new mill next to the mine shaft to process the ore. The 1,200 level of the Daly West mine was connected underground to the Daly and the Ontario mines, allowing water drainage and transportation of ore materials out the Ontario No. 1 tunnel. So in this photograph from the 1890s, this tall building is the wood building that covered the headframe. You can see all the smokestacks from the powerhouse located adjacent to the headframe building. And then these buildings here in front of the powerhouse were the mill, where they processed the ore. These other buildings in the background are offices and boarding houses and bunkhouses for the staff. Other mining companies in Empire Canyon at the time included the Anchor Mine, located uphill south of Daly West, the Quincy Mine to the southeast, and the Little Bell Mine further southeast near the divide with Bonanza Flat. So this photograph is taken from a location east of the Empire Canyon, and so here you see in the bottom the Daly West mine facilities. And then looking over the Quincy Mine, which is located southeast, here's the Quincy Mine that was developed contemporaneously with the Daly West. And then this steep road goes all the way up to Upper Empire Canyon, and you can just start to make out the location of the mine dump for the Anchor Mine. The Little Bell Mine was further to the east and south from the Quincy off the photograph. During the same time John Daly was developing the Daly Mining Company, another prospector and miner named John Judge came to Park City. He was born in Ireland. Just a sec. He was born in Ireland in 1845, and his parents immigrated to the U.S. in 1846 and settled in New York. And as a boy, he worked in the iron mines in New York, and he fought in the Civil War. He married Mary Harnian, in New York in 1867, and together they had 5 children. They moved to Salt Lake City in 1876, and he also worked at the Ontario Silver Mine and later became a foreman for John Daly at the Daly Mine. And so after that, he and John Daly were involved together on a number of mining properties. This is kind of an interesting photograph of the dining room at the Daly Mine boarding house. And this table in the foreground has people seated at it that don't look like miners to me. They're occupied by gents who probably are managers. This fella here is John Judge, and he's looking across the table at a man who looks to me like R.C. Chambers. Pretty nice dining room. So while John Judge worked at the Daly Mine, he was also involved with other mining properties, and he contracted to drive a drainage tunnel shown here from Lower Walker-Webster Gulch to drain the Alliance Mine, where John Daly happened to be an investor and a director. Judge was also involved in the beginnings of the Silver King Mine in Woodside Gulch. Tragically, he came down with silicosis, at the time called miner's consumption, from his exposure to rock dust in the underground mine workings, and he died at age 47 in 1892. He left his considerable mining estate to his wife, Mary Judge, who managed it well and expanded the mining business into Nevada, as well as owning Salt Lake City real estate and part ownership of the Silver King Mine in Park City. She was well known for philanthropy in Salt Lake City until her death in 1909. The Judge Building and the Judge Memorial High School remain as Salt Lake City landmarks of the Judge family legacy. But in 1901, John Daly and Mary Judge formed the Daly Judge Mining Company that held properties adjacent to the Daly West Mine. Here's the 1902 stock certificate for the Daly Judge, signed by John J. Daly. Mary sold her personal stock holdings to the company. In 1902, the former Anchor Mining Company was acquired by the Daly Judge, including the shaft facilities and the boarding houses shown high here in Empire Canyon. And so you can make out multiple boarding houses, and this is the shaft facility and a very large mine dump. It also included the Anchor Drainage Tunnel that Daly had constructed earlier. That same year, the Little Bell and the Quincy mines joined with the Daly West Mine, and thereafter all these mines were connected underground. So, John Daly's dream of seeing the development of the ore bodies he always thought were present in Empire Canyon had come true. He had interests in the Daly West, the Quincy, Little Bell, Daly Judge, and Anchor mines, as well as the large Daly Judge mill. During the same time, he was also investing in the banking business. He was founder of the First National Bank of Park City and was a director of the Commercial National Bank, as well as the Utah Savings Bank, both of Salt Lake. With all his business dealings, I think he could have personally earned millions of dollars by that time and been one of the wealthiest men in Utah. All that with not even a grade school level education. And when most men in the United States were lucky to earn more than $400 a year. So now let's focus on the Daly West mining operations in Upper Empire Canyon. This winter photo shows the Daly West Mine and Mill as it was by 1907. Note the multiple buildings behind the mine and mill, including bunkhouses and boarding houses, to support hundreds of workers. The headframe and hoisting works were still contained in the tallest building, behind the powerhouse stacks, but the mill was greatly expanded compared to that 1890s photo we saw a little while ago. And by the way, this whole site is now the location of the current Montage Deer Valley Resort. So here you can see the tall building covering the headframe. You can see the multiple stacks for the powerhouse, this largely expanded mill facility, and it also included other facilities downhill, all part of the mill process, and these multiple buildings in the background for offices and boarding. Because of those harsh winters, the early shaft headframes in Park City were commonly enclosed with those tall wood buildings. Here's one of the Daly Mine headframes showing a well-built timber structure and the two-compartment shaft. Early mining was very physical work, drilling holes, breaking rock, loading ore and waste rock with hand tools. Here a miner and his helper are working along a vein, otherwise called a lode, of shiny ore you can see behind the miner drilling there. The Daly West Mine had both lode and bedded ore bodies. This miner is drilling a hole with a single jack hammer. The Daly West was known for its up-to-date mining practices, including early employment of air percussion drills, which greatly increased the rate at which blast holes could be drilled. Here's a photo showing miners working a tunnel heading. The miner and his helper are working on top of a pile of broken rock from a previous blast, while the two muckers with the shovels are ready to load out the broken rock. And note the rock dust all over the surfaces at this work site. Many miners suffered lung damage from breathing the dust, which led to what they called miners' consumption. The mining companies quickly learned that introducing some water into the air of the drills cut down on the dust and made things safer. As the ore was removed from these underground openings called stopes, timbers were installed as needed to support the openings. And these openings were then backfilled with waste rock excavated from elsewhere in the mine. The timbermen worked really hard. Imagine the weight of each of these heavy timbers that were wrestled by hand and put into place with a lot of labor. Once the local forests were cut down, timber was brought in from elsewhere in the Wasatch Mountains and the Uinta Mountains, and also from forests in Oregon. Maybe you've heard of David Eccles. Well, he started his wealth with timber operations in 1890s in Oregon. These tunnels were driven at regular vertical intervals called levels to gain access to the ore bodies, and these were referred to as their depth in the mine shaft. In the early Daly West Mine, the mine levels were at the 900, the 1200, 1400, and 1500 foot depths. Horizontal tunnels at these levels were used to transport ore or waste rock. Here we see a rock chute, possibly connected to a stope above, and the miners are queuing up to load mine cars that typically could each carry a ton of ore. They would push these cars along the tracks of the level to the shaft, where the cars would be lifted to the surface. Alternatively, the cars might be dumped into bins and chutes underground, which would direct the broken rock to other locations in the mine. In the Daly West Mine, all ore was directed to the shaft and then lifted to the surface for milling or to the 1200 level where trains of ore cars could be shipped directly from the mine through the Ontario No. 1 tunnel. Here's a tunnel showing the timber supports called sets, the tracks for the ore cars, a large ventilation tube hanging from the roof or back of the tunnel, and a compressed air pipe lying next to the tracks. All these old photos show miners were still using candles for light, which were replaced in the early 1900s by carbide lamps. And oil lamps were used at the main shaft stations for brighter conditions at these dangerous locations. The Daly West was also early to introduce electric lighting to power its facilities. Certain mine tunnels were used to drain water out of the mine, and these were often designed with water flumes located under the rails so the miners did not have to wade about in water all day like these gents. This group appears to be an inspection party with R.C. Chambers in the back. Let's think this gent is R.C. Chambers. Note the rain slickers and oil lamps, suggesting these guys have spent the day in very wet conditions. The Daly West had two main drainage levels, the earlier one being on the 1200 level that drained water 2.5 miles out the Ontario No. 1 tunnel in Lower Ontario Canyon. And later on, there was a tunnel at the 2100 level, which connected with the Ontario No. 2 drainage tunnel that carried that water all the way to Keatley, about 4 miles underground to the northeast of the Daly West shaft. The Daly West Mine, as I said, was connected underground at the 1200 level to the Daly Mine and the Ontario Mine with a long tunnel. High-grade ore from the Daly West would make the 2.5-mile trip through this tunnel in ore car trains to the portal of the Ontario No. 1 tunnel in Lower Ontario Canyon, where the ore was loaded into rail cars and shipped to a smelter in Salt Lake City. Now, the mill-grade ore was lifted in the Daly West shaft to the surface where it was processed in the Daly West mill. The high-grade granular product of that milling process, called concentrate, was then put in mine cars and lowered back down the shaft so it could also be hauled in trains out the Ontario No. 1 tunnel. So here's a photo of one of those early trains with a mule or horse barely discernible at the front of the train. Later on, these trains were pulled with electric locomotives. Here's a photo of an ore chute with heavy timber supports along an Ontario mine level. And the reason why I included this is this photo was inscribed with the name of a miner in this photo as Chris P. Satterup, and that he was later killed in the Daly West Mine disaster. I think his face is somewhat haunting. But what about this guy over here in the dark? What's with that? At 11:20 p.m. on the night shift of Tuesday, July 15, 1902, the Daly West shaft operator sensed a rumbling from underground. The shift boss on the 900 level called for the shaft cage and was lifted from the mine to report that he thought an explosion had happened below the 900 level. It was also found that one compartment of the shaft was damaged, so only one compartment and one cage was usable. Volunteers were lowered to the 1200 level, where explosives gas was very strong. They were then lowered to the 1400 level, where the gas was also present. They decided to evacuate the mine. Some of the miners that were evacuated to the surface were in bad shape because of exposure to that poisonous gas. Other men rushed to the hoist house, clamoring to go down into the mine to rescue their friends, but they eventually only recovered the dead. They found 24 miners who had died from the gas. Some of the volunteers who went down had to be rescued themselves, and they too were overcome by the gas, and 4 of them perished, bringing the death toll in the Daly West Mine that evening to 28. The rescue work was interrupted for a time that evening because the gas concentration in the Daly West workings was considered too high. This gas passed through the connecting tunnel on the 1200 level with the Daly on the Ontario mines and claimed more victims along the way. To explain, detonation of even limited amounts of blasting agents results in the generation of toxic carbon monoxide and nitric oxide, which then converts to nitrogen dioxide, which is also toxic. In normal mining practice, time is allotted after each planned blast to allow these gases from detonating a relatively limited amount of explosives to be removed by the mine ventilation system before miners re-entered the area of the blast. In the case of the Daly West explosion, it was estimated around 4 tons of blasting agents detonated or burned all at once in an underground explosive storage room called a magazine on the 1200 level. The gas created in the explosion traveled through the mine and connecting tunnels as the mine ventilation slowly moved it out of the mine. Miners working in the tunnels that were in the path of high concentrations of the gas were asphyxiated and poisoned. The article in the Deseret News the next day described the scene at the Daly West shaft this way. There were hundreds of brave volunteers, scores of them willing to go down into the depths and risk their own lives in the work of rescue. They fairly filled the Daly West shaft house to overflowing. Every man who went down with the first rescuing party was overcome by the deadly gas. As the dead were hoisted to the surface and laid out, they were quickly identified by relatives comprising wives, children, brothers and sisters, and friends. The bodies, as they lay in the night air, presented an uncanny and gruesome spectacle. The disaster made national news, and many newspaper articles after the event varied in their descriptions of the number of miners who were killed that night. So you have to be careful when you look at these many, many newspaper articles. They're all over the place as far as their descriptions. 6 of the total dead were working in the Ontario mine at the time. So potent was the gas moving from the Daly West into the connected Ontario workings. Since then, the entire death toll of this disaster has been officially set at 34. The Park City community turned out to support the families. Mortuaries from Salt Lake City assisted with the funeral arrangements, including this somber procession of hearses down Main Street in Park City. 20 funerals for the deceased were held in Park City. Many of the caskets were shipped home by rail to the families of the deceased, while others were laid to rest in Park City. And reportedly, 16 of the victims are buried here. 7 of the victims that night were buried in this location in the Park City Cemetery. All of these were young immigrants from Ireland. An investigation was launched into the explosion, and the Daly West Mine was exonerated. Utah passed a law requiring mining companies to not store large quantities of explosives underground. Instead, they built explosives magazines on the surface near the mine openings. You can still visit this powder magazine for the Daly Judge Mine in Lower Empire Canyon that is shown in this photograph. The Daly West Mining Company provided significant financial aid to the families of the miners killed in the accident, which was well appreciated in town. This tragic event is forever part of the history of Park City and the Daly West Mine. On July 14, 1962, the 50th anniversary of the disaster, the Deseret News published an interview with then 80-year-old Lawrence Berry, who remembered the night of the explosion and its aftermath as follows. I was a young man then, just past 20. I had been to a Saturday night dance. On my way home as I reached City Hall, a siren mounted there began to blow. A man rushed by, yelling there had been an explosion in the Daly West on the 1200 level. Approximately 200 men worked that shift, and many of them were stricken by the gas. We brought the dead out. Some of them never knew what struck them down. They were still holding their shovels and looked as if they had just gone to sleep. Families claimed their kin. Every day, the remains of out-of-town boys were sent home on special railroad cars. The townfolk turned out to see them off on their last journey. The mine restored operations, but bad luck struck the Daly West again in December 1913, when a fire destroyed the hoisting and milling facilities, shutting down the mine until they were rebuilt in 1914. A new steel headframe was built, along with a new hoisting building and a new mill. The new hoist and mill equipment was powered with electricity, eliminating the need for that former steam powerhouse. The upgraded facilities are seen in this photograph, and the 1914 headframe still stands at the mine. More on that later. In 1918, the Daly West milling operations were closed, so ore was no longer lifted in the Daly West shaft. The mine was connected underground to the Daly Judge Tunnel, so ore could be removed that way and processed in the Daly Judge Mill in Lower Empire Canyon. The Park City Mining and Smelting Company was formed in 1922, which included the operations of the Daly West and a number of other mining companies in Empire Canyon. The independent Daly West Mining Company then passed into history. The concrete-walled Park City Mine and Smelting Office and Change House shown in this photograph are still present next to the Daly Judge Tunnel portal in Lower Empire Canyon. The other buildings shown in this photograph are long gone. Within 10 years after forming, Park City Mining and Smelting Company has ceased operation, and the former Daly Judge Mill continued mining and moving ore out the Daly Judge Tunnel. This ore was transported to the rail siding in Ontario Canyon with an aerial tramway, built in 1925. The mill was demolished in 1939, but ore production out the tunnel continued until 1952, when use of the tunnel for ore transportation ceased. The mines in the Park City District were brought together in 1953 with the formation of the United Park City Mines Company, which continued to maintain the Daly West Mine workings, but shifted all ore production to be removed through the Ontario No. 2 tunnel, 4.5 miles all the way to Keatley. In 1958, the remaining portions of the former Daly Judge Mill and tramway facilities burned down. So the concrete foundations of this old mill and all the tram towers are still evident in the trees if you want to go look for them. The old Daly West mine buildings fell into disrepair and mostly burned down in April of '74, leaving just the headframe, hoisting works, and a few other buildings. The shaft continued to be maintained for emergency access and air ventilation for the connected underground workings. When Park City Ventures and later the Noranda Mining Company operated the Ontario Silver Mine in the late 1970s and early 1980s, they did continue to maintain the Daly West shaft. After all mining ceased in 1982 and control of the Daly West shaft transferred to the Jordanelle Special Services District, Park City Municipal took over management of the Daly Judge drainage tunnel. The Deer Valley Resort expanded into Upper Empire Canyon in the late 1990s, which resulted in the Daly West shaft being surrounded by the ski resort. And construction of the Montage Deer Valley Hotel commenced near the former Daly West mine shaft in 2007. And this photograph was taken during construction of the hotel, showing what remained of the former Daly West surface facilities. Just the headframe, the 1914 headframe, and a modern hoist building. As shown in this photograph by local photographer Bill Tafuri, the 1914 headframe continued to stand over the historic Daly West shaft. It was a monument to the Park City mining history and was admired by visitors and the local community. But mine shafts require ongoing maintenance to withstand the effects of Mother Nature. The wood supports in the shafts weaken over time, and this eventually caught up with the Daly West shaft. The uppermost part of the shaft collapsed on May 13, 2015, creating a crater that took the headframe with it. In October 2015, the caved shaft opening was capped with steel beams and concrete and backfilled with earth. So now just a small graded opening is left of the former shaft. Cranes picked up the damaged headframe and laid it on its side next to the capped shaft. The steel building that housed the hoisting equipment was damaged when the headframe collapsed, so that building was also removed. And the hoisting equipment has been exposed to the weather like this since 2015. The Jordanelle Special Services District made it known they did not need the Daly West headframe any longer, and they did not intend to repair it. This started a 5-year period of discussions within the Park City community and government about saving that 100-year-old headframe. Deer Valley Resort acquired the headframe and shaft property in 2020. Park City government, along with the Empire Pass Master Owners Association and Deer Valley Resort, collaborated to fix and raise the headframe near the shaft location. Here's a photograph of the repaired headframe being lifted in July of 2022 to its final location where it will continue to stand as a monument to the history of John Daly and the Daly West Mine. So the story of John J. Daly is forever connected with the mining history of Park City. By his early 40s, he had helped develop a number of mines in what is known today as Empire Canyon. He retired from management of his mining interests in 1907 at the age of 54. In addition to his business interest in Park City, he also helped develop Salt Lake City. In addition to his banking interests, he played a major role in commercial real estate development in Salt Lake City. He served on the Salt Lake City Council and the Board of Regents of the Forerunner of the University of Utah. He participated in Utah politics and was also a founder and past president of the Elta Club. John and his wife Eliza were early contributors for the construction of the Cathedral of the Madeleine, and they were joined by other parishioners of the day that were also famous for their connections with Park City mining, including Thomas Kearns, Mary Judge, James Ivers, and David Keith. The Dalys lived in Salt Lake City until 1917 when they moved to Los Angeles. The Daly Mansion at 319 South Temple Street was demolished in 1925. John Daly died in Los Angeles at the age of 74 on October 22, 1927. Eliza lived to the age of 81 when she died from injuries in a traffic accident in Los Angeles in 1939. So passed a couple who had a major influence on the early development of Park City and Salt Lake City. I'd like to offer a description of John J. Daly by a Utah writer and historian, Edward Tullidge. He was a contemporary of John Daly, and he wrote, "Personally, Mr. John Daly is of fine physique in his character, self-poised in judgment, a constant student and devotee of business, sound and sagacious in political affairs, reticent in conversation, but decided in expression. In business and in friendship, his well-known integrity, purity, and truth cause his judgment to be consulted and his friendship to be sought. By his own industry and energy, he has become not only one of the first citizens of Park City, but one of the foremost mining men of the West." So I encourage you to check out some of these other recordings, YouTube recordings, of prior mining lectures and videos related to this topic. And I've listed them here so you can take a picture of this and take it with you and use these names for searching for these titles on YouTube. So thanks for being here tonight. I'd be glad to take your questions. Where all the mines are? How's that? This road that's kind of behind the hill here goes into Lower Deer Valley. And so that is Deer Valley Drive now, or in that neighborhood. And it goes off this photograph to the left where the Deer Valley development is located, the Lower Deer Valley development. This road, this little road going up Ontario Canyon, is now been replaced by Marsac Avenue. And Marsac Avenue goes all the way up to Upper Deer Valley, and which is also located just off this photograph to the left. The Park City Mountain base is off this photograph to the right, but you can see the early King Road going up Woodside Gulch to the Silver King Coalition Mine. And if you ever ski the Bonanza lift at the resort, the Silver King Coalition Mine is right there across the flat from the Bonanza lift. The upper part of the Park City Mountain Resort is off this photograph over here in Upper Woodside Gouge and Webster Gouge. Yep. Yes. Oh, other questions? Yeah, Don. He was not. No, he was not. He had retired from that management position before that occurred. Yep. Well, the Daly West Mining Company, and this was before life insurance, right? This was a long time ago. The Daly West Mining Company offered $1,000 for each of the victims, the dead, that were single for their families, $1,000 in cash. They also took care of the funeral arrangements and those sorts of expenses were all paid for by the mine. For families where a husband perished, the mining company gave them $2,000, and the widow received $2,000, and each child of those families received an additional $500. So for a family of, say, 2 kids, which wasn't unusual at the time, you're looking at a $3,000 cash payment, and in today's dollars, that would be well over $100,000. Any other questions? In the back. Question was, who controlled the land when they first got these claims? This was back in the Wild Wild West, when the land that hadn't already been purchased or otherwise controlled privately was public property. And the federal mining law of 1872 laid out the process that a prospector could use to stake a claim. And so prospectors would go into the hills, and if they found evidence of minerals that would support regulation under that statute, that federal statute, they would stake a claim. And they would then go to the county courthouse and record their claim with the county recorder. And that gave them control to continue to work that claim. And many of these prospectors weren't satisfied with just one claim. These claims were 20 acres in size. They would stake a block of claims of adjacent rectangular shaped parcels and work all of those parcels together as a claim block. If the mining company, and these prospectors, prospectors were guys looking to get rich quick. And they had come off the farm and they were out here in the hills, and this was a good way for them, they thought, to make money. And so their whole business plan was to convince somebody to buy their claims. And so hopefully they would have enough showing, enough reason for someone to buy their claims where they could make some money off of it. Most of these prospectors had no clue how to make a mine, and they did not have access to any capital to do that. And so it was almost always somebody else would come in who had that experience and who had that capital, would buy the mining claims from the prospector, and then thereafter make those investments to develop the mines. As part of that investment, you could patent or take that claim, which was basically federal land entrusted to you. You could actually own it by filing a patent on those claims. And there's a whole process laid out in federal regulations to do that. So all around Park City right now is a patchwork of patented mining claims. And these patented mining claims were all collected together in 1953 and organized into the United Park City Mines Company. United Park City Mines Company was then acquired, went through a number of things, but is currently owned by Talisker or TCFC. And they are the major developers around here. You know, all these developments that you see up on the hills is mostly on land that has been owned and is now either being leased or sold by TCFC. There's still a lot of ore in the ground around Park City. But United Park City Mines, back in the 1960s, they started this thing called a ski resort. And it was called Treasure Mountain. And they thought at the time that their financial future as a mining company would be better off developing the real estate. And to develop the real estate, you need to attract people who will want to buy that real estate. And so if you make a ski resort, now you've got people who will come in and buy real estate. And I think they made the right choice. Any other questions? Yes. If they didn't live in a boarding house at the mine, which was a short walk then to work, they would walk whatever distance it was. So the question was, how did the miners who lived in town get to the mines? The Ontario #1 tunnel, and the portal of that tunnel is still open. I mean, it's still present alongside Marsac Avenue in Lower Empire Canyon. That's a mile long, that tunnel. That tunnel intersects with the Ontario #3 shaft 600 feet down below the surface at the 600 level. The change house, where the miners would change their clothes, was on the surface. And so miners from Park City would walk to the tunnel. They would then walk a mile up the tunnel to the shaft. They would get lifted 600 feet to the surface, change their clothes, and then get lowered back down the shaft to whatever level they needed to work at. Once they got to that shaft level, say they went to the 1,000 level, they then had to go to their place of work on the 1,000 level. So they might have to walk another mile underground to get to their place of work. And they were paid from the time they got at the face and started work to the time they stopped work at the face. All that walking back and forth, they didn't get paid for. Now that changed in the 1920s, 1930s. The miners got organized into unions, and the unions, changed those practices. But back in these days that we're talking about, the miners were only paid when they were working at the face. Yeah, Ron. Who owns the water? There's a lot of water underground, and the mines drained that water with drainage tunnels. And to describe exactly who all owns that water, we don't have enough time. But the water that is coming out of the Judge Tunnel and the water that is coming out of the Ontario #2 tunnel, some people call it the Keatley Tunnel, all of that water, thousands of gallons a minute between those two tunnels, is controlled by Jordanelle Special Services District. I don't know if they own the water rights, but they control the water, and that water then is sold by them. Other in the back. So the question is, how did they keep track of where the ore was and wasn't underground? And they did it with surveying. It's amazing if you can look at these old mine maps, and it's just amazing the level of detail in these old mine maps, all done with old survey equipment. I have forgotten how to survey like that. Yeah. And so they did the best they could. And as it turns out, sometimes they didn't do it very well because there was commonly litigation between these neighboring mines. And miners in one of the stopes in a quiet time would hear mining noise just on the other side of the wall. And it's because the neighbor mine is over there busily mining away ore owned by the other mine. And so there were many, many lawsuits between these mining companies where they would allege that the surveyors of such and such mine lost track of where, and were trespassing onto the other mining companies' claims and stealing their ore. And this resulted in a lot of these acquisitions and mergers of these mining companies because they would fight and fight and fight, and it became clear that it was going to be a very expensive litigation. And so there were these courthouse steps agreements, and these mining companies would merge and stop arguing. They exist. The mining records exist. The mining records are owned by United Park City Mines, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of TCFC. That's their private property. The last remaining geologist of United Park City Mines, I have begged him to allow me to, it's down in the valley, in West Valley, someplace, in a storage unit somewhere. Massive amounts of boxed records. And so I've represented the Park City Museum, and I've talked to officials at TCFC and told them, please don't let those records go away or get destroyed. The Park City Museum is very interested in saving those records, and at some point in the future, let's talk about that. But no, it's not in public domain now. Yeah. Which way to go? Right. Yeah, the mining engineers created a plan. Yes. Yeah, the comment is that mining engineers working for the mining companies would help plan the development of the mine, and the miners would follow those instructions. So yeah, they had a plan. They pretty much knew where they were going to go, what they were going to do, but the surveying accuracy at the time was such that it was slightly problematic. Yes.
Let's go back a bit. You said when the prospector filed a claim, how much land was in that claim?
The question is, what is the size of a claim? 20 acres.
40 acres.
20 acres, yeah.
So how many miners does this represent? How many workers own these mines?
Well, the question is how many miners worked these mines. In the census of Park City in the 1890s, I forget exactly the year, it was early in the 1890s, the population was about 2,800 in Park City at the time. Oh, yes, I mean, it could be. I don't know how many miners. Yeah. Question. The question was, if you have different shafts in different locations, what's the difference between the levels? The levels are measured from a survey point at the surface of the shaft. And so the 900, for any particular shaft, the 900 level would be 900 feet down that shaft, and so on. But there's a lot of topography here. The hills are pretty steep. And so if you connect different mines, you're connecting different levels. And so at these mines that I just described, at the Daly West Mine, the 1200 level connected underground to the 800 level at the Daly #1 shaft. The Daly #1 shaft then connected a long way away with the Ontario #3 shaft at the 600 level. Yeah. Another question, yeah. Yeah, the Ontario #3 used to have that mine history experience. Yeah. That's the Ontario #2 tunnel. #2, also called the Keatley Tunnel. Any other questions? Great questions. Thanks for your interest. Okay, thanks much. Have a good evening.